the next panel discussion will talk about the battery swapping over conductive or inductive charging. I'll repeat myself again. Battery swapping over conductive or inductive charging, where we will highlight about power system perspective, EV owner perspective, and station owner perspective. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. One, we are having this session after lunch, and second, we are already way behind schedule. So I have two jobs. One, to make sure that you don't fall asleep, and second is that I don't extend this session so that Chetna does get enough time to kind of moderate and chair the following session. So I think what we are trying to discuss over here is, I think basically that when you are looking at electric vehicles or electric mobility, the question is, should we focus on charging, be it conductive, inductive, charging, overnight charging, destination charging, or should we also look at swapping? And that's the broad premise of this discussion, that is it swapping versus charging, or it is swapping and charging? And if so, what are the use cases where we feel swapping has a superiority over charging? And what are the use cases where we think that probably swapping can play a complementary role or a supplementary role to the destination charging? So that's the large premise for this discussion. And the reason I thought I'll just give it upfront is that last year we did some work with Niti Aayog looking at battery swapping for two-wheelers. And some of the elementary work that was done by us was led to this eventually framing of the policy which came out. And we hope that by next month we'll get the final policy. And a couple of interesting insights came from that publication. One, in case of two-wheelers, swapping was much more viable when the usage was in excess of 100 kilometers per day. And the reason why it was so is that typically when most of the models have a range of about 100 odd kilometers, and when you exhaust that range, then there's an opportunity cost which is involved in charging. And so once you include that into the conversation, then swapping was much more cost effective. That's point number one. Point number two was that in the short to medium term, we realized that swapping would not substitute the overnight charging. In fact, we found that it was going to play a supplementary role to charging. And third, which was very interesting, was the fact that a lot of the vehicles that were getting subsidies when batteries were part of the vehicle. And once you remove that battery and you bring into swapping, then the subsidies will not kick in. And once you include that subsidy, then the cost of operation comes down even more dramatically. So I think those are some elementary questions that was discussed in that publication. And it really came out with the conclusion that there is a use case for swapping. One, we did not consider availability of power, quality of power, those kinds of parameters. Once you include those parameters, then definitely the case goes up. So there is a case for swapping. And second is that swapping versus charging can coexist depending on the type of vehicle and the use case for that vehicle. So that was the broad premise, the takeaway from our publication that came out. But with that as a background, I will ask all the panelists to give their opening remarks, maybe 4 or 5 minutes each. Then we will have a follow-up question, and then I will kind of open it up for the audience to have slightly more interactive session. So let me start by asking Karthick to give his thought on the subject.
Yeah. Well, I think it's charging and swapping, obviously. Electric mobility, I think, will continue to stay this way till batteries kind of get commoditized. And that's a good 15, 17 years away, when you really wouldn't care much about how you manage the energy because the battery gives you so much of bandwidth. So till such time, these are going to be what I call solution designs, right? Context specific, user specific. I think last 3 years, it's always been discussion. And I think at least now we should start looking at tables, graphs, calculations, market segments, start thinking user at a detailed level, not just leave it with English paragraphs, but actually go into the user preference. Like even in commercial e-commerce, delivery, etc., we know that three-wheelers, they're going to stay put in that route, and he's not really going to go to another town on that three-wheeler on a personal trip. But Amazon or Flipkart may commit that they will have electric two-wheelers, but they don't own the vehicles and they don't own the risk. It's the single individual who's actually being contracted, and he wants to take a 250 kilometer trip once in a while, just probably 3 or 4 times a year, and he wants to make that trip. So is his decision going to be influenced by that? Yes. So we should look at user perspective and not at averaged out data, right? It's an extremely non-design thinking. I'm a product development guy. So typically we tend to keep the user in the center and start looking at all aspects through their eyes. You may not be able to satisfy all, but you should know what you're not satisfying. And therefore you'll know your market segment size. And start targeting those, have swap products for just those, and then if battery charging time comes down to 5 minutes, it's a non-issue, swap will die. Earlier, about 5 years ago, when we started swap design at Ashok Leyland, there was even a money case for it because you had only 1.7 times the battery, while otherwise for a city bus I had to have 3.5 times the battery, and battery cost was high at about $350. At 200, the money factor left, but there were other reasons, right? So we need to start getting granular. We need to start looking at workings, market segmentation, tables, etc. It's time for that, and we need to start focusing there. We've done 1.5 million electric vehicles. I'm assuming 1 million of them are two-wheelers. And all the numbers there, none of them went into even the 4th digit, right? Or it was 3,000 vehicles on that system. That's the maximum. And we've been around for about 3 years. These are all market. You think that if the potential was for 500,000 vehicles, we'll be having this session, market would have driven itself into that space. So we need to not start deciding, but actually analyzing and calculating, and start focusing on those where it clearly makes sense. Opportunity cost, your report was brilliant. So opportunity cost, if it is there, then it is viable. Now, I spoke to some of the Amazon guys, but honestly, he doesn't think 45 minutes is a big deal. He's not going to lose money. He would rather wait and charge, right? But we told him that this would be the difference in cost. That was an estimate. But this is the kind of research that's required. Research is required. Data is required, segmentation is required, and no more English paragraphs, no more philosophies and concepts. We have it all behind us. We need to start looking at it with that level of granularity. Another point, I think, I forget who made it, but that's a very important point. Three-wheeler guys do not have, they live in streets where they can't even park their vehicles. They park their vehicles 3 streets away. So either he charges very fast without affecting his business, which is pretty much on the cards and possible today. And if he can't wait for even 1 hour to charge for that day, then swap is his thing. But how many of them cannot wait for 1 hour? This is data, and that's required. And we need that level of granularity, which means there is a need for research and therefore funding. So I think we need to change our method of dealing with swap. It's not about government policy, it's about market forces first. Understand it. If there's a viability gap, even playing field is required, right? No doubt about it. All solutions need to have the same kind of government support. But beyond that, I think we need to start looking at the user, the market, the customer. That's what is most important. Not about our philosophies and our strategies and our opinions. And that has not come out in a single meeting so far, and we need to get our act together for that. I was in love with swap. We did it with Sun. It was a brilliant experience. No one in the world has done 190 kilometers per day per bus, air conditioned in Ahmedabad traffic when constructions were going on. Swap did it, right? And we used to swap each bus 7 times a day, 18 buses. So it was at scale operation. So there is merit in certain cases, but we need to quantify it and start thinking consumer rather than OEM or startup or government or whatever. The consumer dictates these things, otherwise it will collapse again, right?
Thanks a lot, Karthik. I think some very, very valid points, especially looking at consumers and then kind of looking at how does the OEM, government and the ecosystem fit in. So with that, let me move to Mr. Venkat for his opening remarks on the subject.
Yeah, that was a pretty brilliant opening remark. I am going to speak from a practitioner's perspective. I don't understand a lot of paragraphs, but I can tell you that the general feeling between swapping and charging is that, you know, from a battery perspective, people say that, yeah, take the battery, you know, make sure that it can fit into that whatever dimensions you have got, put a handle, it becomes a swappable battery. Okay, I can tell you that's so not true. Okay, for those who have sort of done this there, and predominantly I'm talking about from a two-wheeler and three-wheeler perspective. I'll tell you our experience started little over about 12 months back. Of course, the swapping battery itself is a completely a different beast inside, right? You need to have you know, batteries that are, you know, that can communicate to the, you know, swapping station, that can communicate to the charger, that has a near field communication, all of them. So it's essentially in terms of, you know, a smart battery that has to go. 90% of the batteries in India do not meet it as on today. We all know that, right? So which means that if somebody were to say that I'll repurpose my battery for swapping, that's not going to be the case, right? Number two, you know, I think in the morning, Mr. Priyank Agarwal, you know, articulated it well. We had an experience where, you know, customer said that, listen, you are going to swap it, okay? Show me that you take your battery, swap it in the station, put it back 2,500 times, okay? And we went through this exercise for 6 full days, right? 5 guys, you know, taking the battery from the vehicle, putting it back. What we realized is there is no plastic today that can handle that kind of, you know, that kind of impact that happens on a battery pack, right? Because the battery packs are heavy, you know, in spite of being a 2 or a 2.5 kilowatt hour. And we went through, you know, multiple, you know, we went through, you know, an FR ABS, a combination of PP with ABS and multiple special compounds. Then we realized that for Indian conditions, you cannot have a material that's going to withstand unless you go for a, you know, an extruded aluminum or equivalent kind of thing which can handle that kind of impact, right? And, you know, when we were doing it, you know, I think, you know, but these are all to be seen, to be believed. You know, the guys took the battery, you know, out of 1,000 times, one of them, he dropped it. Okay, luckily it did not sort of, you know, there was no, you know, physical injury. But when you drop the battery pack, you know, your life is gone if it is not designed well. Okay, said then customer said that I want to know how many times customer is dropping, right? Because it's going to be happening because you are going to put it on a swapping station which is at least about 5-6 feet away. We needed to include some kind of, you know, a gyro and other things to make sure that every time when there is a drop, you measure it so that it goes into the state of health of the battery, right? The third aspect of it is the thermal part of it, right? So today the requirement is higher energy density, especially in two-wheelers. And no matter what you do, you know, because the higher energy density, especially it goes into a two-wheeler, you are going to have a thermal situation which is going to be very difficult to handle. Of course, all the AAS 156, Rev 3, they are all sort of making sure that that point is reinforced. But the point is, when you are designing such battery pack, you know, the thermal, you know, handling becomes extremely important. Of course, now people are talking about pressure relief valves and all the other stuff, potting materials and so on and so forth. But in short, what I wanted to say is that on one hand, there is a policy, standardization and so on and so forth. But, you know, in our mind, swappable battery is a completely a different battery pack when compared to what we are using for a normal one. And I think we need to treat it that way, right? I do not think we can, you know, very easily interchange one from another because that would not be the right thing to do. I think that's my opening remarks.
Thanks, Mr. Venkat. I think this is a very interesting point that swapping swappable battery is a different battery altogether. And that is something that has to be kept in mind. I think a very, very interesting point. Now let me move forward. I'll invite Amit to share his opening remarks.
Thank you, Amit. I'm another Amit. So I will probably give you an OEM's perspective from So if you look at it from a three-wheeler market, I think the Indian three-wheeler market is 40, 60 lakh vehicles, 4 lakh adding every particular year. This ecosystem is ready for a 100% transition from ICE to. I'm not validating that, but that's a fact. And once that happens, we lose. Why I'm adding this because we're in Delhi, AQI index is on the paper, and we lose. We reduce the emissions by about 10 kg per vehicle per day, and that's an important aspect. So from that perspective, we are agnostic as an OEM. Is it swapping, or that is conductive? Is it inductive, or is it swapping? That really doesn't make sense. We're okay with all three. But when we start discussing internally, and we really, at a very philosophical level, we discuss, we play, let us say, play four particular layers. When we look at technology, I believe all three technologies tick the box. There is engineering challenges in inductive to some extent. Swapping, there is no engineering challenge. Conductive, the proof is on the board. We know what is happening. Financials, I think Priyank made a mention. When we are looking at commercial vehicles, I don't think the cost benefit really comes to the customer. I'll come to the customer part a little later, because I don't think the customer really benefits eventually. At the end, he will learn. If not today, he will learn tomorrow. Third is scalability. We firmly believe that swapping in the Indian context, forget about the Europes or the western part of the world, will certainly remain between 2 to 3 wheelers for various reasons. 4 wheelers and above, it would be either conductive or inductive, as in when that technology really goes, because that is scalable. Interoperability is an issue which was discussed. So that really gets addressed at that particular point. For a customer, I suppose the decision is yet to be out. And I think that, as everybody said, he will decide which cake to take. And as an OEM, we are ready to offer him all the 3 flavors. Whichever he chooses, we'll put it on the table.
Thanks, Amit. And so let me first go to Mr. Debi Prasad and hear his remark, and then we'll come back again on some of the follow-up questions. So over to you.
Okay, so many good points has been mentioned. Taking from Karthik's point regarding its customer choice, like just now, how many swappable vehicles on road compared to number of vehicles which is operated by charging? It's less than 3%, 2.53%. So that's the fact. So it's not like the customers will come after 10 years who will choose all the swappable. But India is not like other country. It will go only swapping or only charging. Here it will be mixed. So as we work with few of the both OEMs and battery manufacturers, and sometimes we work with through survey to consumers, what we see maybe for different type of vehicles, in controlled environment, it may be geographically controlled like SEZ, townships, something, or it may be regulatory controlled. Like if one organization is running multiple vehicles, or one transport agency is running multiple vehicles, then swapping is the solution. We don't tell swapping is the only solution. Swapping is a solution. It addresses 3 things, which is the major concern in India. One is social issues, on fire, on accidents, on theft, and another is on financial issues. If it is moderated by, controlled by an agency, then financial issues also can be addressed. And third one is technically, which is actually government is working on that. Just giving, otherwise charging is the better option. Maybe portable batteries, which will be the hybrid, or it can be middle way of a swapping and a charging. Portable batteries. So India have to find out their own way of business. It cannot go in a better place where like everything is good and they'll fail, or like a go-go way. India have to find their own way, like electric buses and other thing. We cannot tell all electric buses should go for a charging stations, because there is maybe pantograph based what is happening in China. That may be a better solutions in India. So so for different type of vehicles, maybe 2-wheeler, 3-wheelers is better. For electric buses, it may be swapping is a better solution. So we agree it's on the environment, and business model will definitely drive. If it is not driving in initial stage of 2-3 years, yes, policy will support it, but policy can't force the consumer or can't force the investors to just go for one type of business. So that's we feel as part of IESA.
Thanks a lot, Debi. Let me just follow up with Karthik. Karthik, you mentioned about this battery swapping, which Ashok Leyland did in Ahmedabad, and I saw it, and it was, I mean, you have to see it to believe it, the way it was functioning. The question was that, one, it did not scale up beyond those 18 buses, and we have not seen similar experiments happening in other parts of it. So, can we conclude for these larger form factors like buses and all, swapping is really not a viable opposition?
I don't think um, you can conclude. You can say it as of today, it's not an option. It's not matured. It tends to be definitely more expensive than fast charging. It tends to be, in fact, that's how we worked with Sun Mobility. We had our costs for fast charging, and then we asked them to match it because we had a per kilometer contract, right? So finally, Sun had to take a beating on their pricing in order to get that going. We also had to take a beating, but that's how new things evolve. If big players don't do it, who will do it? So the point is, I think in terms of the connectors, there is a need to replace them far more often, because typically commercial vehicles run for many more hours compared to private personal transport. So because of those, you do have much more wear and tear, etc. And also commercial vehicle market is a kind of cutthroat market, even though it's still a seller's market. Transportation, believe me, in India is a seller's market, not just for the OEMs, but also for the material movers. It's an extremely cutthroat market in terms of costs. So if it's not the lowest cost, it's not getting that business break. So commercial vehicles, I would say that unless you're a party, I think your report made it quite clear. There are some 3 very clear cases. Let's say somebody can't, under any circumstances, find the money up front to buy a batteried vehicle. So then swapping is a choice for him, because otherwise he will lose the business. He'd rather get into the business with less profits, right? So it's impossible for him to buy a battery vehicle. I think that market segment is probably 2 or 1% of the total market. Second, if real estate, either it's incurred by him as heavy cash cost, or if it's simply not available, then it's a case. Not because of money reason, but because of operational reasons. You would not be able to run the transport cycle at all. So rather than not do the business, you take swap, which is higher cost, but you have really no other option for electric mobility. And the third one is this opportunity cost. Are you really worried about 7 minutes to 30 minutes or 1 hour? If yes, and you lose a lot of money in those 33 or 43 minutes, then you should be going for swap, because you're making more money by using the swap. But what is the market size for this? I don't think it's that many, right? So probably all these put together, you're looking at, today, to compare those figures to the overall thing, there's one unfair angle to it. Those are running without subsidies, and those are running without any of the fiscal incentives, and the penetration is about 2.5%. So if you probably make it an even playing field, it's probably going to go up in quite a few cases, because guys don't want to go, nahi yaar, I have so much of cash flow, I'll just buy the damn vehicle, I don't want to go for a loan. There will be people who will migrate to this. But what is the segment? Research, right? But for commercial vehicles, I think as of today, it's not going to be a great solution, either on account of cost or on account of the state of the technology in connectors, etc.
Thanks, Karthik. I think this issue about commercial vehicle operation being different from the personal vehicle operation, that is an important point, because a lot of time when we are doing this analysis, we don't consider these costs in terms of the wear and tear and some of that impact on the overall life cycle cost analysis. So I think that's a fairly important point. I will now move on to Mr. Venkat. You mentioned swapping battery being different from the usual charging battery. So does that in any way impact the overall cost of swapping operation? I mean, does it really increase the cost, and if so, by how much?
Yeah, so yeah, so there is a pre-AAS Ref 3 and post-AAS Ref 3 answer to this. Because earlier, swapping battery from day one, you needed to have a smart BMS in it. From day one, you need to have some kind of a communication, CAN or otherwise. From day one, you need to have, all the thermal things have to be taken into account properly. And you also needed to have, an enclosure which is going to be a lot more rugged than what normally the traditional batteries are there. So it does add to the cost, okay? But the good thing is now with the AAS 156 Ref 3, the expectation is that there is going to be an increase in cost of about 10 to 15%, depending on from where you are coming from. For I'm talking about the batteries where they are already giving it with a good smart BMS, and then you are adding all of these features in terms of temperature sensors and then pressure relief valves and so on and so forth. So clearly, I think there is going to be there is a cost difference. But my bigger point is along the lines that Karthik talked about. Today, it's not a level playing field, right? Today, this 2.5% comparison is a misnomer in my opinion, because if I were to have, a vehicle without battery, I do not even know how to go and register with my state RTA, right? It does not even allow me to do that, right? Today, I cannot go there to a swapping station where, he is going to be paying 18% GST on, the electricity charges, and he is getting, he's paying at a commercial rate for them, right? Which is not true for the, for the traditional EV power tariff. And the third thing is I don't get a subsidy on top of all of them, right? Subsidy is a very important factor, whether we like it or not. That's a very significant factor in adoption. So today, if I were to do, this is not an apple-to-apple comparison saying that I have done a million vehicle there and we have done only 2.5%. We need to have this, I think the whole discussion we had in the morning about making sure that, you sort of, in some which way, enable the ecosystem to develop, right? In some form of standardization, some form of technical specification, some form of subsidies, some form of making sure that there is a, power tariffs and all are equalized, between the traditional EV and the swappable battery. Then I think it would be a good comparison to take it up. And clearly there are some segments which are amenable for swapping today, right? If it were to be available, I'm sure the industry would get on to the next orbit with that. That's my 2 cents, yeah.
Absolutely, and I think this question of creating a level playing field is very important, because in our research also, when we looked at the scenario where we applied the FAME 2 and the state government subsidies on battery swapping, then we saw that even at a very low level of utilization, the cost came down dramatically. So I think that's an important point, and to make a fair comparison, we'll have to include that subsidy angle as well. So with that, I think, Amit, very quick points. I mean, is swapping also, so a lot of time we are seeing vehicles are being retrofitted into electric, and I think Delhi government also has a policy where it is allowing vehicles to be retrofitted. So when we are looking at retrofitting the vehicles with electric drivetrains, is swapping more, I mean, is it easy to create swappable batteries or the other way around? I mean, you have some experiments on that.
I think retrofitting itself is a very complex process in itself. While when you go into the details, retrofitting is not an easy exercise to do. At a very philosophical level, it's got its own complications built into it. Any person who's going to seek a retrofitment would certainly see the cost benefits, and I'll probably put from a commercial perspective. He spoke about the Amazons of the world. There is, and as he said, while the data does not play, we have spoken to these companies, and there is enough time in between their operations in which charging can be done. So I think retrofitting, if there is a space, there is a space for commercial vehicles for the passenger segment, not really for the space for commercial segments. They can, in terms of their pricing, seek that back from the customer and allow him to get the same value proposition which he gets from a normal vehicle. So we'll have to further probably get into details, segment it further. I really don't think for commercial vehicles, for cargo, it would be a sensible option, if you may ask that way. For passengers, I think there's a possibility because the pricing can be easily tweaked, and there is play in that particular space to operate on.
Okay, fair enough. Valid point. Debi, my question was, and again, IESA works a lot on storage, energy storage, and one of the important use case that has been talked about is using the swapping station for some kind of grid management and grid balancing. Is that something which is practical, or are we still talking about theoretical aspect?
That's a good question. Yeah, it is possible, but if you ask me question when it is possible, don't think about next 3 years. Don't expect in next 3 years, because it involves, there is two things. How swapping station will connect it to the grid and balance the grid. It is not only swapping stations, it can be a battery for a charging station, or it may be combined of small batteries and with rooftop solars at different homes. So these all can be connected to the grid unless CA or CRC create a regulation for it, the first thing. But it is required. And now as multiple generators are coming to the grid balancing is becoming an issue. But to realize this, policymakers will take time, and it will come some time, and it will give advantage to actually swapping stations for additional revenue. And that's the business model. So current 2.5, that I not telling that it will be 50-50, but it will grow. Current 2.5% will definitely grow. It will grow to maybe 15 or 20% or 30%. That is one thing. Other thing about this policy, energy storage swapping station, is how much technically it is equipped. So that also system companies need to invest in that. So considering example of other countries also, it is very limited. Europe, it is negligible apart from UK, how swapping stations are connected to grid. Only in US few companies are doing it as a pilot. And so on that regard, technically your bidirectional communication need to be there, and your grid should be so active to send the signals to these asset owners to charge and discharge to balance the frequency. So there is multiple things need to be developed as the electricity grid ecosystem. So that will definitely take time. I'm giving a certain time period for the 3 years, but other part which is now at current stage it is beneficial, which irrespective of government policy, is your swapping station as a whole, when it is ideal, can supply power to any commercial industrial establishment. That's a low hanging fruit, because they have multiple issues, power backup issues using diesel genset, and they have power outage. Second one, they have also not getting good power quality, because if it is a hospital nearby, and they have bad power quality, they are using StartComs and other thing for the batch manufacturing industries. So there you can supply this swapping stations when it is ideal to that, to get additional revenue. So maybe not for grid, but for the CNI, it is possible, but you have to, the business model need to be evaluated, how to get financial benefits from this asset.
Thanks a lot. I think some interesting use case example of what could potentially be, apart from grid balancing, is doing some kind of emergency power requirement supply to some of these establishments. But again, business model is something we'll have to definitely look at. Okay, so we will now open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, my request would be raise your hand. That's good. Second would be please identify yourself, and then whom are you asking the question. So I think someone will come to you with a mic. If not, probably you can shout. We'll try to hear it out, and we'll try to answer the question. Please, go ahead.
Karthik, question for you to start with. See, I was doing a little bit of mathematics of my own, and I have a feeling that buses are not as green as lightweight two-wheelers.
Are not?
As green. When I say green, I have a simple measure. I am looking at watt-hours per passenger kilometer. My calculation tells me that if you have a Yulu kind of vehicle, you are doing half the watt-hours per kilometer compared to an Ashok Leyland bus. We can discuss it offline, but by and large, it also is 1/5 the capex. If you give every passenger Yulu, you will still end up putting money into your pocket. And Yulu kind of vehicles or low weight scooters are not very in the mix of EVs that everybody has been talking about. It's very underrepresented. So I think this is my feeling, it's a policy problem, and as a bus maker, I would want to know your take on that. So that's the question for you, Karthik. Amit, next question for you. Amit Bhatt. Yeah. So a lot of people talk about battery swapping. But when you look at a vehicle where say 60% of the cost of the vehicle is the battery, will vehicle swapping not make more sense than battery swapping? Is that something which I have not seen anyone discussing today? Want to know your take on that because you're in that field. Thank you very much.
The kilowatt hours used per passenger in a two-wheeler tends to be much better than what it is in a bus. I wouldn't know, and I'm happy to agree. So, because this is a math which the transport department does. Typically, OEMs respond to market. They do not decide policy. So if the CO2 assessment has to be done, it has to be done by the policymaker. As a bus manufacturer, we will respond to the policy and the consumer's response to the policy. That's how we do business. If we try to control that agenda, there would be just disaster, because everyone thinks that the auto OEMs control policy, and you should see the meetings we have with the government, like we are enemies of the state, right? And Siam, there are so many of us with so many agenda, there's no way we can be one single body representing one single interest. These things are all newspaper kind of very passionate articles. The fact of the matter is, we do business, and we do business legally as permitted. If there is a very marginal penalty for the consumer by going green, we tend to take the penalty and encourage the customer to go green. That happens in Ashok Leyland as a company, right? Similarly, if we take a small hit on profits, but there is a possibility to reduce emission, we take that hit. But small is a very subjective word. It's English, right? So it depends on the mood of the chairman when the program review is happening, and we will see how the small percentage varies, yeah?
Yeah, I think interesting concept on vehicle swapping. And so I had seen one experiment which was tried, and a lot of it is still in the theoretical stage, is the ongoing work around national highways for electric vehicle, NHEV work. They were trying to come up with some kind of electrification strategy for freight vehicle, and vehicles which are probably more than 12.5 ton, in that range. And that's where they were looking at, can we look at vehicle swapping? The reason being simple, that if you have a container load going from here to, let's say, Kanpur, 400 kilometers, range is 200 kilometer. At Agra, the entire cargo shifts to a different vehicle, and the vehicle moves forward. So those are the conversations which are happening, but still it's a very theoretical stage. We'll have to see how it translates on ground in terms of some the actual implementation of it. But again, very interesting concept, and we'll have to look at in a little more detail.
It's whether he wants to change the battery or the vehicle. He buys a vehicle for the experience and the utility. I have no business. He doesn't care if it's about a set of 60 rats or an electric powertrain or a diesel which is moving the vehicle. He's interested in experiencing the vehicle. So vehicle swapping will find very few takers, even in commercial vehicle cases, where you have the battery as yours, but actually the vehicle is the variable. Anyway, that's just one point. One point on shared mobility is different. Yeah. So, shared mobility is a nice way of reducing the penalty of an upfront investment in electric mobility. On retrofitment, I just need two aspects to be understood. Never ask an OEM. We'll always say it's not a good business or not a good model. But to be fair, if it is an application like a two-wheeler or a car or a long-distance bus or a truck, you're looking at pan-India support for spares and aftermarket. So typically these guys will not touch retrofitted vehicles because they're probably a small company, and if my job, I take a new job in Bangalore from Chennai, I've lost my aftermarket support, right? So big players need to come in, and the big players are making vehicles, they're not doing retrofitment, right? Right now that's one part. The other one is, in spite of that, the business case with this constraint is strongest in one passenger three-wheelers. I've done the math. It's a kit of about 114,000. And everyone in the value chain makes money. Everyone. Now that's a win-win. And it's not going anywhere. autos are a lobby, you know that, right? It's a cartel. So that guy's got his license for that city. He's not going anywhere, so that's one very, very strong thing. Another one is school buses, where there is so little money and so little of utilization that there's sense in retrofitting, and once again, he gets a permit based on a vehicle that's homologated for his state. And each state has different homologation laws for school bus, right? So that's once again a geographically constrained market with no money to spend on a new vehicle. So retrofitment, strong business cases in these two segments. And we just need organized players to come, wait it out for 3 years, and then it'll start zooming up in each of those cities.
Thanks, Karthik. Any more questions or no further questions? So, before I close, let me give one final round. Any concluding thoughts on the topic? And this time I'll start with my left. Maybe you should go Devi first, and then we'll end with Karthik. Any concluding thoughts on the discussion?
So one thing, yes, as currently there is only few vehicles are in swapping. Government is proactively creating some policies and few stakeholders, including ISA, is supporting it. So individual inputs to the government need to be thought about. Like few companies going for, okay, let's make apart from standards, let's go for standardization or something. Similar inputs need to be thought about, not only for your business. It should be like a growth of the industry. So this is just a suggestions to the key industry players who are emerging in this space.
I don't know if there's anybody from the government here. We have not really discussed anything on induction or inductive technology. I believe there needs to be more open-ended discussions on that. It seems to be one solution which could be one shoe fits all kind of a, it appears that way. So probably more heads put together, something may emerge which will collaboratively give value to the whole industry at large.
Yeah, so to swap or not to swap, I don't think is a question anymore. I truly believe that we need to get some of this, the policies, standards, BAS, all of them out of the way. Otherwise, industry is going to, find a way out, actually, right? So we have two choices. I'm sure that there is a lot of folks who have been sort of discussing this for a couple of years, but now I think need for action, actually.
Yeah, I just heard that there's an association that's been formed, so that's brilliant. And you should probably find something like 7 to 10 crores and give yourselves 12 months. Do the research in terms of the user segments, etc., and come up with a rock solid proposal for a standard battery, which is authorized, not authorized, which is probably approved by neutral people like Aayera or IITs or whatever, right? So that the government is happy accepting a report which is not necessarily from an industry body, but which is at least ratified by a central government or such things. You'll just have to be careful about how you structure it. I have become a champion at it in the last 2 years ever since I started. I left Ashok Leyland. But honestly, if the association goes about that, I think there can be big impact, very big impact. But the first work is not to go and talk to Niti Aayog, but the first work is to actually focus inwards and do the work internally and get all that done. And that calls for money. And that's difficult for new associations, right? But really, it's going to be brilliant if we can do that. Very happy to hear that news. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Karthik, and everyone in the panel. One, sticking to time, and then giving enough time to Chetna to continue her next session. So thank you for that. But I think what was really interesting was the kind of quality of discussion. I think few important takeaways. One, definitely there is a space for swapping, conductive and inductive charging. And as we move forward in the journey, we will realize how the system grows. So that's one. One, I think it's not fair to compare the number of swapping with charging, because it's not a really level playing field for swapping and charging. So I think one have to levelize the cost and then look at the numbers. And third was very interesting is that there will be use cases where swapping will be the only option for charging. And there will be use cases where one have to look at, probably create some kind of trade-off. And what Karthik said was absolutely right. We have to get this granular data and identify the use cases and then move forward. So hopefully, I'm also pretty hopeful that now the association has been formed, we will create generate a lot of India-specific numbers, which are really kind of coming from ground, and then kind of champion this cause forward. With this, I would like to thank everyone, including the audience, for your participation, and thank you once again.